She only comes out at night, the lean and hungry type. Nothing is new. I've seen her here before. From the depths of his dream, Dakota heard the start of the song. It was one of those oldies that George loved, but Nicky rolled his eyes at. Old school stuff, he called it. Like he didn't have a love affair with the Wu-Tang Clan since the 4th grade. His mother would have a bird if she bothered to listen to some of the stuff that came out of his Walkman, but he was careful to keep the lyrics under his breath. Cody! Dakota rolled over, trying to block out the sun, the birds, and his mother as she called from downstairs. He'd been dreaming of the house at the end of the block again. He'd been dreaming of the Shelby place, and how it had taken his friend on a long-ago summer day, almost 4 years ago. Dakota hated the dreams, but it was hard to shake at the best of times. As his mother called him again, he tried to keep his mind on the hazy kitchen of that dark house. The door was opening, and any second now the monster would snatch Chris, and he would be... He groaned as his eyes sprang open. He'd lost the dream. He bemoaned that summer break couldn't have started yesterday as he rolled out of his bed. From the clock radio, Hall and Oates were warning a young man that he better beware, that he better take care, because the woman he'd set his eyes on was bad news. She was a real man-eater. Cody, are you up? Come on, honey, it's the last day of school. You don't want to be late. Pulling on the same jeans he'd worn the day before. They weren't that dirty, after all, and if they couldn't stand up on their own, then they'd keep for another day. He slid on a t-shirt that was the no color of many washes and many wearings, and laced up his high tops as his mother called out again. From downstairs he could smell the mingling aromas of bacon and eggs, pancakes and butter, and it made his mouth water. I'm almost ready, Ma, he called back, grabbing his bag and descending the stairs. His sister had beaten him to the table, and one look told him that she had decided to eat first and get dressed later. Her hair looked like a bird's nest, and she was still wearing her nightgown with the happy horse on it, something that her other sophomore friends would have rolled with laughter if they'd seen. She looked up from her eggs long enough to stick her tongue out at him, and he returned the greeting as he reached for the ketchup. Gag, she intoned, rolling her eyes as she watched him cover his eggs. Have you had a look in a mirror yet? You got a lot of room to talk, Dakota said. Come on, kids, his mother said, adding pancakes to his plate. Rachel, your bus will be here in 5 minutes, and you aren't even dressed yet. Cody, she began, but Dakota cut her off. Come on, Ma, nobody calls me Cody anymore. I've been Dakota for 6 whole months now. Cody makes me sound like a baby. She kissed his head, ruffling his hair as he tried to wiggle out from under it. Well, you'll always be my baby. The doorbell rang just as he was finishing his pancakes, and Dakota whooped with glee as he got up to let his friends in. Nicky was on the stoop, his hair giving him an extra 2 inches, and George was with him, both grinning as Dakota came out the door. He yelled back inside that he had to get to school and grabbed his bag as his mom stuck her head out to hand him his lunch and ask him if he had everything he needed. I'm all set, Mom, he said, waving his hand as he headed out the door for school. Have a good day. Don't forget the curfew, she shouted. Dakota made a disgusted noise, like anyone could forget the curfew. Like you could forget the thing that was going to ruin your whole summer vacation. Shake a leg, Nicky said, slapping him 5 as Dakota came stumbling onto the front porch. It's our last day. We want to get there quick and get out quicker. Dakota grabbed his beat-up Huffy from under the eaves, and the boys set out towards whatever might come. It was the last day of school, and he was hoping to make it fly by so he could get on with his summer. The streets were a bustle with kids heading to school, and they pulled their bikes out amongst them like ships on the bay. They knew every inch of the neighborhood, having played here since their earliest memories, and as they set out for school, the whole world seemed bathed in that pre-summer glow that signaled the return of freedom. Nicky was already making plans for a bottle hunt after school, wanting to recycle the empties so they could go to the movies this weekend. But their plans were paused as they came to a stop in front of a familiar house. It had been a sad, peeling reminder of their missing friend for the last 4 years now, but it seemed like it had gotten a facelift. The house on the eastern end of the horseshoe had been freshly painted, the scrag grass cut back to a respectable level, and the for sale sign had finally been taken up. There was a moving truck out front, and as they watched, a pair of burly moving men went in and out with various bits of furniture. It seemed an odd omen to begin the summer on, and if any of them had believed in portents, it would have given them more than a pause. "Looks like somebody finally bought the old McCormick place," George said, breaking their spell as they set off again. "Hope they've got some kids," Nicky said. "We could use some new blood on the street. Might be nice to not be a trio anymore. Not that I don't appreciate your company," he added with a grin. None of them spared the same reverence for the old Shelby place as they rode by, and for good reason. If Chris's old house had been ill-kept, then the Shelby place was a downright eyesore. It was easily the largest house on the block, and had been a crumbling wreck for as long as any of them could remember. As bad as the overgrown yard and peeling outside were, all three boys knew that the inside was worse than the outside. Dakota still dreamed about the nightmare caverns of that peeling relic sometimes, but the kitchen was always the worst. That sickly, horror movie green tile, the bloated dark wood of the cabinets, the rusted sink that somehow still dripped, and that single bandy-legged table with its solitary chair. The basement door had come creakily open, drawing the four boys' attention as they looked at the gaping maw of that waiting monster. Chris had gone to it, shining his light down as he prepared to descend. They had told him not to, said it was too much, but he had looked back and, grinning, told them not to be such chickens. That's when something had grabbed him, tugging him down into the abyss and out of their lives forever. They'd run like cowards, and when the police had questioned them later, they had all said the same thing. Something had yanked him in, and Chris had been gone. As they rode past, Dakota imagined he could almost see someone looking back at them through the single smeary window that hadn't been covered with wood after someone had broken them out with rocks long before they had ever been born. He turned away from the house, not wanting to know what ghostly apparition might be there. The little neighborhoods that made up the boroughs were soon behind them, and as the trees parted, they came out on Culver's main street. The town had its Memorial Day bunting out, and the effect was impressive. Culver tried its best to attract out-of-towners, tourists who might pump a little money into the economy, but ultimately, it was up to the locals to keep the place afloat. Dakota and his friends rode past the drugstore, the movie theater, the little hardware store where the old men were already gathering, and onward to City Hall. They were passing the large notice board when they first saw the girl. She was a stranger to them then, a skinny blonde girl on a fading red 10-speed who was looking at the board with some interest. She looked up as they approached, and Dakota thought for a moment he'd seen a ghost. Her eyes were blue, her blonde hair long and fine as the wind moved it, her smile genuine as she lifted a hand to greet the boys. She was older than Chris had been when he'd been snatched, but they could have still been siblings. "Excuse me, I'm looking for the middle school. Do any of you guys know where it is?" "Yeah," Dakota answered. "We're on our way there now." "Cool. Mind if I follow you? The maps here are kind of useless." "Not a bit," Nicky answered for them, as he fell into a comical bow over his handlebars. "Allow us to introduce ourselves. That's George and Dakota, and I'm Nicky." "Crystal," she said. "We just moved here from San Diego." She fell in with their convoy with the comfortable ease that would have surprised an adult, but seemed as easy as breathing to children. They chatted a little as they rode in a small cluster of students, all making their way to one of the three schools that gave Schoolyard Road its name. The elementary school came first, looking like a saltine box lying on its side, then the middle school, which looked like a kid's sandcastle, except made of bricks. Beyond it was the high school, but none of them would discover its mysteries for another 2 years, if they were lucky. As they slid their bikes into the rack in front of the slightly lumpy brick edifice, Dakota voiced the question they'd all been wondering. "Are you really starting today?" he said, sounding apologetic. It's the last day of school before summer." "Oh no, I won't be starting till next year. My mom got a call from the principal yesterday, and she sent me with some forms for the office. I guess they need authorization to get my records from my old school." As the four walked through the door, they saw a small board by the office that held the same sort of foreboding as the one in front of City Hall. It held the posters of the 2 kids who'd gone missing in April, as well as the faded reminders of those who had gone before them. Crystal stopped to look at them, and Dakota suddenly wondered if it had really been the map that had drawn her attention earlier. "Spooky stuff," Nikki said, leaning in to half whisper into her ear. "Madeline was a little girl, but Jasper was older than us. It's crazy to think that he could have been snatched like that." "Snatched?" Crystal asked. "Well, sure," George piped up. "That's what they call it when kids go missing in Culver." "How long has it been going on?" Crystal asked, sounding a little afraid as she glanced at the older notices. "It officially started a few years ago," George said, moving up to stand next to her. "It's usually between 2 or 3 kids a year, but most of them are just chalked up to runaways. That's what they're calling Jasper, though his dad claims he never would. It's a little harder with Madeline, since 6-year-olds don't usually run away on their way to Girl Scouts." "Do they think it's the same person doing the snatchings?" Crystal asked. "It's been floated," Dakota said, "but no one seems to know. There's no pattern, nothing connecting it. It all just started happening about 4 years ago." "Jeez, guys," Nikki said, trying for sarcasm but landing on put out. "Great way to welcome a new face. I'm sure now she'll want to stay forever." That's okay," Crystal assured him. "My dad and I are into that kind of thing. Spooky stuff doesn't really bother me." The bell rang then, and Crystal thanked them for helping her. "Maybe you'd like to hang out with us after school," Nikki said hopefully. "We're trying to get some money together so we can see a movie on Saturday." "Sounds like fun," Crystal said, and as the boys split off to go to class, Dakota hoped she would come hang out with them. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he felt like she might be the 4th they've been looking for to round out their group. A group that had felt incomplete since Chris had gone missing. When she met them outside the school later, the mood was drastically different. "This is so unfair," Nikki said, throwing his hands up as he walked to the bike rack. "They're just being cautious, Nick," George said, trying to calm him down. "It isn't enough that this curfew means we have to be in before dark, but now all the businesses have to close an hour before sunset, too? None of the good movies even started before 6. All we'll be able to see is baby movies on the daytime matinee." Last time I checked, The Black Cauldron wasn't a baby movie," George put in. "Grow up, Georgie," Nikki flashed at him. "I wanted to see something with some teeth, not something rated PG." "What's wrong?" Crystal asked, mounting up to ride with them as they explained what had happened today. The last day of school was usually something reserved for yearbook signings and pizza parties and end-of-the-year relaxation. Today had been mostly taken up by an assembly with Sheriff Millwood. He had recently had the job dropped in his lap by the former Sheriff Gabriel Hurd, and he was trying his best to get this kidnapper so the town didn't hang him from one of the lampposts some night. As such, he had taught a 3-hour assembly on stranger danger and summer safety, and told all the kids about the curfew and the limited shopping hours, and how it was all to keep them safe. "It's to keep his job safe, you mean?" Nikki said. "My dad said that if one more kid goes missing, the Elks Club's about ready to pull their backing, and maybe even cut his brake lines." "That's awful," Crystal said. The main street looked more like a ghost town now, and they could see the flyers for the new hours of operation in every window they passed. "Oh, he's not serious. They'd never really cut his brake lines." "No, not that. I mean the kids are going missing, and they don't seem like they have any idea why." Dakota shrugged. "It's just something that keeps happening. It's why we stay in a group. The kids that get taken are usually by themselves." "It's still a little odd," Crystal said. "I rode around some today while you guys were in school, and it seems like no one has any clue what's going on. They're afraid, but they can't say as they've seen anyone or any weirdos in vans or anyone suspicious. Most of them seem to have just chalked it up as something that happens." "Yeah, it's a real pain," Dakota said, unknowingly mirroring his elders, but really just wanting to change the subject. "So, did we still want to get bottles for movie money? We can go ahead to the dump, and what if we did something?" Crystal said, making it sound like a sudden idea, but clearly it was something she'd been considering. "Like what?" Nikki asked. What if we kind of looked around, Crystal said. You know, kind of helped out and tried to find the culprit. All three boys looked at her like she'd lost her mind. You want us to try to find the guy who's snatching kids? Dakota asked, not sure he had heard her right. I mean, if the police can't find him, what chance do we have? Nikki pointed out. Oh, I don't know, George said. The police have overlooked a lot of key evidence here. I've been telling you guys for a while now that this didn't actually start with the kids. It really started about 6 years ago with... George, I swear to God, if you trot that missing pet crap out again, I'll snatch you myself, Nikki said. But it makes sense. After all, we were looking for missing pets when Chris got... But Dakota gave him a look, and he clammed up. They didn't talk about Chris any more than they had to, and certainly not around people who weren't in the know. Dakota liked Crystal, but she wasn't there yet, and might never be. Come on, guys, Crystal said. Sounds like you've already thought about it. What did you really have to do anyway this summer, besides goof around? George was already sold, and Dakota could see Nikki beginning to flip-flop. He couldn't say it surprised him. If a pretty girl told him to catch the culprit all by himself for a chance at a date, he'd probably try. Nikki was a soft touch when it came to girls, and Dakota could tell he was about to be outvoted. I guess we could try, Nikki hedged. I mean, what were we really doing anyway? Plus, Crystal added, just to sweeten the pot, imagine the reward money if we pull it off. You'd probably have no need of bottle picking to get movie money. Oh, heck yeah, Nikki added, lifting his bike tire in a magnificent 2-second wheelie before almost falling off as he dropped it back down. I'm in. She had grasped both Nikki's great loves, money and girls. There was no chance of salvaging it now, and Dakota knew it. He sighed. Fine, but promise me that when we don't find anything in about a week, we'll give this up and move on. Agreed. Sure, Crystal said, smiling brightly. Let's meet in my garage this afternoon. With any luck, we can wrap this up before school starts and get everything back to normal. Sure, Dakota said. Piece of cake, right? You're still here. I thought you might be. Thanks for joining me for tonight's story. If your insatiable appetite for horror knows no bounds, might I suggest one of our playlists, or one of our previous stories in the archive? There should be one appearing at the end of the story any minute now. And of course, if you're not subscribed, why not go ahead and hit that subscribe button? Maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the spooky things that we do here. If you prefer your horror a little more analog, you can always pick up one of my books. There's a link below to my latest, and it'll take you to all the great things that I've posted on Amazon. For my book lovers in the audience, I always suggest coming on down to Patreon so you can become part of my ghostly reader tier and get a book anytime I write one, which is usually about twice a year. Speaking of my patrons, let's go ahead and thank them, shall we? Thanks to Unicorn Hollow for being our spooky ghost contributor. Thanks to Janet and Lady Vengeance for being our spooky skeleton tier contributors. Thanks to Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Marianne Schuler, Tyler Parker, and Jennifer Damron for being our ghostly reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you think you might like to support the show in a more monetary fashion, come on down to Patreon. I have many tiers. I'm sure you'll find one that suits you best. I always recommend the ghostly reader tier since you get a signed book anytime I write one on your doorstep. But I have many tiers, and again, I'm sure you'll find one to suit you. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.